I want to open up with these few verses in the book of Habakkuk, verse 1 of chapter 1. The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to be troubled? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore perverse judgment proceeds. Here's Habakkuk, a man of God, a prophet, calling out to God, saying, all these really bad things are happening here in Israel. Why aren't you helping us? Why aren't you helping us? Habakkuk had the idea that God would need to help him a certain way, and he had already preconceived ideas about what God needed to do to stop the violence and the trouble and the contentions and the issues that were going around in Israel. But God never does things the same way, and he never shows up in a way that you're expecting. He makes it impossible to predict, and therefore we live a life as a Christian in a life of uncertainty. Look how God responds in verse 5. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told to you. God comes back to Habakkuk and says, bro, don't worry about it. I'm going to do something that's going to be so blown, it's going to be so outside your parameters that you're not even going to believe it even if I told you. And it turns out it's a horrible answer. It turns out that the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, come down and sack the city and take everybody who wishes to give themselves up, and he walks them out back to Babylon in Iraq. And they live there 70 years. God's judgment upon Israel for their sins. But Habakkuk comes back and says, whoa, that's not what I meant. What? God's like, well, it doesn't matter what you meant. I have the keys to the ideas of what I want. So the point is that living a Christian life leads us to a certain degree of uncertainty. And if we're not careful, we will limit God. We will limit God in the way that God can work in our lives, in our problems. This came to life today when I was reading in this daily devotional called My Utmost for His Highest. On the April 29th daily devotional is called Gracious Uncertainty, and the author is talking about the idea that if you count out God by predicting what you think should or would happen, then you don't allow him to work in the amazing ways he does. Instead, believe that God is coming no matter how he comes, and realize that he's going to answer it in his way, and you just have faith that he'll be there no matter what. I read in here, and it says, we are uncertain of the next step, but we are certain of God. As soon as we abandon ourselves to God and do the task he has placed closest to us, he begins to fill our lives with surprises. When we become simply a promoter of a defender of a particular belief, something within us dies. That's not believing God. It is only believing our belief about him. And the author finishes by saying Jesus said, believe also in me in John 14 verse 1, not believe certain things about me. Leave everything to him, and it will be graciously and gloriously uncertain how he will come in, but you can be certain that he will come. Remain faithful to him. What he's saying is don't count out God by predicting what your beliefs about God are. Just be open to the uncertainty of life, trusting God to be there. Because God in the Bible never promised that he was going to deliver you a certain way. He only promised that he would deliver you, and you don't know the outcome. Instead of believing what he can do, just believe that he will, and let it be. We see that in the life of David, and that's the story I want to touch on today. Because David, after running in the wilderness for years trying to stay away from Saul, learned to be completely and utterly dependent upon God, not because he knew how it was going to turn out, but because he just simply believed that God would be there, and however God chose to deliver him was up to him. And it translated in his walk of faith, and it translated when he became king. Now Saul is dead, and now David, having been a king in Hebron for 7 years, has now been promoted to the king of all of Israel, and he is now trying to deliver the nation away from the enemies of the Philistines. And we see this faith in God that he has, that he doesn't expect how things are going to work. And therefore, as the author here said, take the next step. Just take the next step and understand that God will come with a surprise or two. We see that in this story, chapter 5, verse 17. Now, when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. Now remember, we've talked about it in the past. David is in the direct line of lineage of Jesus. David is the one who receives the promise from God that that he will always have someone in his lineage on the throne in Jerusalem as long as time goes on. It turns out that Jesus is the final king. But David is a man after his own heart, and Satan knows this. And so Satan always came up against David because it's his will and his desire to destroy David so that the lineage of Jesus could not continue. And so once they learn that David becomes king of Israel, they come and attack. There's always an enemy counterattack when something good happens in your life, doing what God has asked you to do. It says that the Philistines came up looking for David. David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. And the Philistines also went and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And so David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand?" And the Lord said to David, "Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand." Now, it says here that he calls upon the Lord. That's what he's supposed to do. Lord, what should I do about this battle? It's your battle. I'm only here to fill it out for you. I don't know the outcome, but you tell me what to do. And God says, go. Now, interesting, he uses this word, doubtless deliver. I will doubtlessly deliver. Now, a couple of chapters ago, God said, I will deliver them. But today, this time, it's, I will doubtlessly deliver. And it got to me to thinking, why did God need to put an extra punch in the promise he gave to David? Well, I read in the Jewish historian Josephus, and he said that it wasn't just the Philistines in this battle, but because the Philistines had been beaten time after time against David, they brought Phoenicia and Syria with them. So it was an army that was 3 times the size. David looks upon this giant, almost insurmountable army, and he says, God, what do you think? And he said, I will surely, doubtlessly deliver them into your hands. And so David went, a man after God's own heart. He never questioned, he never doubted, he never failed. He asked God, God said, go and take them out head to head. And so he goes. He went to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water. And therefore he called the name of that place Baal Perazim. And they left their images there, their gods, their little gods, their intricates that they had there. They left them there, and David and their men carried them away. Now that's great. David calls on God to help them in this war, and they win. God delivers them into the hands of David. But the Philistines were relentless, and so they come back again, the same army, and they go to the same place. It says, then the Philistines went up once again and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. It's almost like an instant replay. And if we are living the life of our own intellect, if we're using our own IQ and we're watching the way things happen in real time, we might be silly enough to do it the same way. But Being a Christian means that we must rely on God, and He will deliver an uncertainty in our life. We cannot say how God's going to do it. We can only say that God will be there when it does. And so being that way, and being a man, a king, running around the wilderness trying to keep himself alive when God delivered in all kinds of different ways, David is a man who understands he needs to seek God again. David says in his heart, I need to do the next thing. It is always to call upon God to tell me what to do next. And he is not let down by this. It says in verse 22, the Philistines went up once again and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And therefore David inquired of the Lord. And he said, you shall not go up. Circle around behind them and come upon them in front of the mulberry trees. And it shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, then you shall advance quickly. For then the Lord will go out before you to strike the camp of the Philistines. And David did so, as the Lord commanded him, and he drove back the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. See, David calls upon God again for a second time. Now, he's looking at the same army in the same place, and the first time it worked. Why wouldn't he just go out and do it again? That he would rely on his own intellect and his own strength and power, on his own direction to do this, but he doesn't. He understands that God, in uncertainty of what it is he wants to do, will show up in ways you can't predict. Remember what Habakkuk said. Remember what God said back to him. He said, look, I'm going to do something. Even if I told you, you're not going to believe it. And so the great tactician that God is, he says, no, don't go straight up on them. You know they have a plan for that. Go back around, come in from behind, and go into the mulberry trees. And when I start to move the trees, it'll start sounding like a great army marching, and it will scare them, and I will go out and defeat them before you even get there. He says, make sure when you hear that sound, you advance quickly. And so what happens? They all show up and they're all hiding in these mulberry trees. And when the trees start blowing and making sound when there is no wind, as Josephus points out, they become afraid that the army that is advancing, that they can't see and it's snuck up on them, they get up and they start running. Well, it's easy to defeat an army that is running away is easy to defeat. And so David and his army run them down and destroy them. God does something supernatural. Nobody would have ever come up with that idea. It is the uncertainty of our Christian life that allows us to reach new heights and to see wonderful surprises and things that happen in our life that we don't understand otherwise, things we can't predict. And I could speak of that in my own life. Things I could have never predicted have happened, not because I forecasted what I thought might happen, but that I only had faith that God would be there to do whatever he was going to do. I hope this encourages you this day. It certainly encourages me as we're sitting watching crazy stuff happen. You don't know the outcome. We can sit here and watch the numbers and the news and the who has the higher edge and who's got the most interesting people and who has the work. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because God's going to do a work that we wouldn't even know it. We have no idea how any of this is going to turn out. The point that was made here, again, Jesus said, believe also in me. Believe in who I am. Believe that the fact that I care enough and that I have the power enough and that I will deliver you in my way. Believe also in me, and it does not say believe certain things about me. Believe and have a relationship in God, not believing things about God. Leave everything to him, and it will be gloriously and graciously uncertain how he will come in, but you can be certain that he will come in. Remain faithful to him and be delivered. Be well this week. Blessings.